August 1975. In the quiet farmlands of Henan province, a storm gathered above one of China's proudest engineering feats. In just one night, that pride would turn to horror. An entire province swallowed by water. Villages gone, tens of thousands never found, and yet the world barely noticed. This is the Forgotten Files. And tonight, we remember the Banqiao Dam collapse. But this isn't just a story about water and walls. It's a story about silence, about how ambition drowned warnings, and how one disaster revealed the fault lines, not just in concrete, but in a system too proud to listen. The Banqiao Dam was born in the ashes of catastrophe. The Great Leap Forward had left China devastated. Tens of millions starved, fields failed. The trust in state-led engineering had been shaken. And yet, the nation's leadership pushed forward, determined to rebuild a better future, faster, stronger, and more self-reliant. Flooding had long been one of China's most lethal threats. For centuries, the Wai River caused untold devastation across the central provinces. The Communist Party vowed to finally tame it. Banqiao was the crown jewel of that promise, a concrete embodiment of mankind's triumph over nature. But its construction came at breakneck speed. Political urgency outpaced technical rigor. With assistance from Soviet engineers, construction began in 1951. It was to be a revolutionary design, using the latest materials and techniques. It would stand 118 meters tall, span over 400 meters in length, and contain over 600 million cubic meters of water. The design was bold and risky. When Soviet support ended in 1960, Chinese engineers were left to complete the project, often improvising as materials and funds ran short. One man, Chen Xin, dared to challenge the plan. A hydrologist with an eye for safety, he warned of inadequate floodgates, flawed modeling, and the region's historical rainfall data being dangerously ignored. He insisted the dam could not survive a catastrophic storm. For this, he was branded a pessimist, removed from the project and reassigned. And yet, on paper, the dam was flawless. Propaganda celebrated it. Schoolchildren painted murals about it. Local farmers built their lives around it. It was a symbol of the party's promise of control, stability, and future prosperity. A promise that would soon be shattered. However, engineers like Chen Xin warned the dam's design was unsafe. He argued it lacked enough sluices to handle extreme rain. But his concerns were seen as political dissent. He was demoted. The dam's supposed invincibility was promoted in the press. Schoolchildren memorized slogans praising it. But locals who lived near the dam knew the truth. Each rainy season, they held their breath. Typhoon Nina began like many other tropical storms, its swirling arms forming in the warm waters of the Pacific, its path uncertain. At first, it was not seen as anything unusual. But Nina was different. It was born with a fury that had not yet revealed itself. As it made landfall in southern China, it collided with a cold front stalled over Henan. This atmospheric clash created the perfect conditions for a catastrophic rainfall event. What followed was not a storm, but a siege. For days, rain fell without pause. The sky wept with such intensity that visibility dropped to mere feet. Entire days passed in a dim gray haze. In the Banqiao watershed, rainfall levels smashed every known record. Over 1 meter of rain fell in less than 24 hours, an unimaginable deluge. Engineers monitoring the dam grew increasingly anxious. As water levels rose at alarming speeds, the dam's critical threshold came into sight. The sluice gates, meant to discharge excess water, had become clogged with silt and debris. Years of poor maintenance, political disincentives, and underfunding had taken their toll. Only a fraction of the gates were operational. Frantic calls were made to higher authorities. Engineers drafted emergency reports, but communications were unreliable. Local officials feared repercussions for spreading panic. Bureaucracy strangled initiative. The central government, mired in other priorities, delayed critical decisions. In the villages surrounding the dam, the people had no idea of the impending danger. They were used to rain, to hardship. They built makeshift levees with sandbags and mud. They moved valuables to upper floors. They whispered about previous floods, never imagining this one would be different. Children watched water pour from rooftops like waterfalls. Mothers boiled rainwater when wells ran brown. Fields were now lakes. Ducks swam in courtyards. The very landscape had changed. And yet the radio played patriotic songs. No warnings, no alarms, no call to flee. The people were left in the dark, both figuratively and literally. Many homes had lost power. Candles flickered on family altars. Elders prayed. Inside the dam's control center, the mood was grim. Engineers scribbled projections with trembling hands. Charts showed a point of no return, but speaking up meant risking one's career, or worse. In Maoist China, truth was dangerous. Loyalty mattered more than fact. As the pressure climbed and the clay core of the dam began to show stress fractures, the engineers made one last attempt. They attempted a partial discharge. Too little, too late. The river had already risen beyond containment. The mountain reservoirs feeding the watershed were spilling over, funneling even more pressure downstream. Outside, villagers tried to sleep. Some heard strange noises, groans and low rumbles from the earth.
Just after midnight on August 8, 1975, the Banqiao Dam gave way. It began with a groan, then a rumble. The wall of water surged forward with unimaginable force, an artificial tsunami 6 stories high, sweeping across the land. The initial wave obliterated everything in its path. Entire villages disappeared in seconds. Trees snapped like twigs. Concrete homes crumbled. Trains were derailed. Telephone poles folded under the force. Families were washed away, mid-sleep, never to be seen again. The shockwave of water didn't stop. One dam fell, then another, and another. In total, 62 dams collapsed in a deadly chain reaction. The flood spread outward like cracks in glass. The roar of water was so loud that survivors described it as a never-ending explosion. People ran in all directions, but few could outrun the surge. In the dark, parents carried children. Old men tried to climb trees. Boats were flipped like toys. Some clung to anything that floated. Doors, livestock pens, even corpses. One survivor remembered floating for 2 days, her baby strapped to her back, both covered in mosquito bites but alive. The landscape transformed. Towns turned to lakes. Highways became rivers. Crops vanished. Livestock drowned by the thousands. Entire regions went silent. Those who survived the initial wave faced new horrors. With communications destroyed and roads impassable, rescue was delayed. Helicopters circled, but the reach was limited. Supplies ran low. People drank floodwater and ate rotting vegetables. Disease spread rapidly. In the chaos, stories emerged of impossible choices. A man who had to choose which child to carry. A woman who tied herself to a tree so she wouldn't be swept away. A teenager who guided a raft of neighbors to higher ground, only to be taken by a second surge. No one was untouched. Even far from the dam, people were displaced. Entire counties lost populations. What was once familiar, fields, homes, roads, was now a graveyard beneath water. The numbers are staggering. Over 170,000 lives lost.
some from the flood, others from famine, disease, or exposure. 11 million people affected, hundreds of thousands of homes destroyed. But numbers cannot capture the pain. Entire families vanished. Survivors were left without names to mourn, only memories. Mass graves dotted the countryside. In some villages, no one remained to bury the dead. Survivors lived for weeks in makeshift shelters, tents made of torn sheets, fireless kitchens. Children who had never cried before, now inconsolable. Mothers begged for clean water. Aid trickled in slowly, too slowly. The psychological wounds were deep. Some who lived through the night would never speak of it again. Others told their stories through poetry, journals, or in whispers to grandchildren. The trauma passed from one generation to the next, and yet, amid destruction, there was resilience. Neighbors formed protective clusters. People shared their last rice grains. A farmer built a raft out of oil drums and saved dozens. A teacher reopened class in the shell of a collapsed schoolhouse. Still, the scars lingered. Survivors were marked not just by loss, but by the sense that they had been abandoned.
The Chinese government quickly suppressed the disaster. In official documents, the scale was minimized, the death toll reduced. Foreign journalists were denied access. Survivors were told not to speak. There was no day of mourning, no national address, no compensation for many of the victims. For decades, the event was known only through rumors and quiet recollections. Those who tried to speak out faced consequences. Civil servants lost their jobs. Survivors who sought answers were labeled troublemakers. Families of the dead were warned not to hold public memorials. State-run newspapers mentioned only minor flooding and praised the heroic response of party officials. It wasn't until years later that truth began to surface. Western intelligence captured satellite images of the flooded zones. In the 1990s, declassified documents painted a clearer picture. Chinese citizens slowly began sharing their accounts online, risking censure break the silence. Some brave individuals preserved diaries and photos in secret. One engineer's handwritten notes, hidden behind a wall panel in his home, were only discovered decades later by his grandson. A teacher recorded the names of all the students lost in her village, writing them in ink on the underside of a table. Chen Xing, the whistleblower hydrologist, lived to see his warnings vindicated, but he never saw justice. He died with his report still largely unpublished in China. Even today, his contributions are rarely acknowledged in official textbooks. The Banqiao Dam collapse became not only a symbol of environmental disaster, but of state suppression, a tragedy too vast to hide, yet too dangerous to openly confront. Even today, it remains a footnote in many history books. But in the hearts of those who lived through it, it is a wound still open. When survivors meet in private, they speak in hushed tones, as if the water still listens. China now manages the world's largest system of dams. From the Three Gorges to lesser-known facilities, engineering feats dot the nation's rivers. Lessons from Banqiao were supposedly learned. Modern dams boast early warning systems, regular inspections, emergency drills, real-time monitoring. On paper, everything is safer. In government presentations, the future looks flood-proof, but technology cannot solve what politics obscures. Whistleblowers are still punished, data is still withheld. Disasters, when they happen, are often downplayed. In 2021, regional flooding in Henan led to dozens of deaths. Reports were slow. Officials denied infrastructure failure. The shadows of Banqiao remain. Climate change presents new dangers. Stronger storms, heavier rains. Infrastructure built decades ago is aging. As rivers swell and patterns shift, risk rises. The human tendency to forget is perhaps the greatest threat. And it's not just China. Around the world, nations build monumental structures, dams, levees, nuclear plants, often with insufficient scrutiny.
often under political pressure. From Brazil to India to the United States, stories echo the same refrain: warnings ignored, disasters foreshadowed. The Banqiao collapse is a warning, not just for China, but for the world. A reminder that nature respects no ideology, and that systems which punish truth will always be vulnerable. To forget Banqiao is to risk repeating it. Every dam built without honesty, every emergency ignored for pride, brings us closer to the next great flood.
In a single night, tens of thousands died. But this wasn't just a tragedy. It was a message written in water and silence. History isn't just what's remembered, it's also what's buried. And in the case of Banqiao, the truth was submerged along with the bodies. If this story moved you, if you believe that forgotten voices deserve to be heard, subscribe to the Forgotten Files. Join us as we search the shadows of history. This was the Forgotten Files. Until next time, stay curious and stay vigilant.